Hello everyone, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Great. No problems getting here? Seems like it's the first cold day of the year and I immediately already have problems with the subway. Okay. So anyways, and I kind of use, and I'll explain later how I used this particular information in this particular session to figure out if I was going to be on time or not. Just by measuring the time that it took me to get from one station to another. So this session is all about measuring outcomes, and this doesn't look like 98 people to me, but anyways, there was an awful lot of interest. Let's see, let's make sure that you get what you're here for. Okay, so who am I? I'm Gino Marckx. My official title is a business improvement consultant. That's what I do. But other people might call it an agile coach. My background is as a developer. I build teams. I'm really passionate about making teams thrive. And I've been active in the Toronto Agile community for quite some time, and around it as well, originally from Europe, and I work there in communities as well. So this session is really all about outcomes, but the ideas, and I'm going to focus on delivery metrics, delivery for teams specifically, productivity metrics if you will, but those ideas and the techniques that you will learn in this session, you can apply for anything else, right? So I happen to know that last month, unfortunately I wasn't here, but last month, there was a session on OKRs. You could use, for instance, the techniques that we learned today to apply to OKRs and actually measure whether or not you're on track. And you get, in the end, you get a couple of examples, really concrete examples of good metrics, and even we'll provide you with some tools, some software tools to get some meaningful insights yourself as well in an extremely easy way, okay? Okay, so the first thing that you need to know about working with metrics is that you shouldn't measure anything unless you're willing to act on measurements. Right? This comes from a book called How to Measure Anything, which is really a very interesting book, and the links again to all the books that we have in the presentation, you'll get those in the end too. This is the first thing that you need to know. There's a lot of organizations that I've worked with that measure and measure and measure and trying to get insight, but they're not really willing to act on the metrics and the insights that they gain through those measurements, through that data. So if that's what you're doing, don't even bother. You're going to mess up systems, so systems are the way that people work together, and at the same time you're going to put some overhead on people so that they need to do some extra work in order to get those metrics, and you wouldn't get the value from, right? So make sure that you're willing to act on the metrics that you are discovering, or the things that you're discovering. This is going to be a bit of a workshop, because I want you to go home or to work with some very practical things that you can apply right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to give that paper around. You're going to split yourself up in groups of about 3 to 4 people. It's not hard, it's just a conversation that you will have. But the paper will help you take a few notes of the things that you discuss while you're going through. So 1 paper per team is good enough. I'll tell you what you need to do in the meantime, so just hand this out and already form groups.
How many members per team?
Remember, 3 or 4. So 3 or 4. Self-organized. Okay, so who works in an agile environment here? Who works in an agile environment? Everyone. That means you know how to self-organize. Self-organize in groups of 3 to 4 people. Five people is good too. It doesn't really matter all that much. Okay, great. So let me get back. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, is just brainstorm, or list, if you will, a couple of metrics that you currently use in your teams. Who's working with a team these days? Who is? Almost everyone? Who's a software engineer? Anyone? 2? Who's a tester? Who's a scrum master? Project manager? Some other roles where you actually manage teams, or okay, great. So use the metrics that you are using today to get an understanding of the productivity or the performance of your teams. Just list those. Just discuss them briefly. You get about 3 minutes to do that. Does that make sense? Okay, 3 minutes starting right now.
Right, or do you want me to write? No, you're looking at it. No, you can try to what do you want? Okay, standard velocity. Burn charge. Sprint burn and release burn.
See you. See you too. Coffee after
It could be that quick.
Okay, nice turn. I'd like to see that. Actually, okay. Okay, so about 2 minutes left. Should have some metrics already.
From project management, for example, financial metrics.
Different ranges, so last 3 sprints, last 5
Schedule.
change. So better to me is better than average.
Yeah. Good before. So you're
For the next minute.
well, a lot of these really don't use. I see a lot of we look at security. That's subjective. I can see like a metric. Are they talking teams or are they actually living, breathing, improving those retros? Team morale checklists. Team morale, team turnover.
Okay, great, wonderful. So let's hear it. What are some of those metrics that you guys are using these days? Shout out.
Velocity.
Velocity is one, yeah, okay. Who else has velocity? Quite a few. Okay, great. What else?
Lead time.
Feedback.
No.
Lead time. Oh, lead time. Yeah, sorry, lead time. Okay, great. Who else has lead time? How do you define lead time? How do you define lead time?
When the work starts, so counting when the work comes in
Yeah.
until it's done.
So when the work comes in, when it's identified, until it gets done. How do you define done? Is that in production? So not sure. Okay, no, that's fair. That's fair. Just try to get a sense of where you are. Okay, what else?
Cycle time.
Cycle time. Use cycle time as well. We'll explain what that is later on. Difference between lead and cycle. Yeah.
Percentage of change of velocity over a period of time, over a period of sprint.
Percentage of change of velocity over a period of time. Okay, interesting. Okay, that's an interesting one. Are you actually using that in your teams?
Yeah.
You are.
I've done, yeah. Recently.
And you hope that that percentage is positive?
Yeah, hope, but even if it's negative, it's good to talk about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else?
Story count and CFDs, but those feed into the cycle time, lead time,
Story count and?
CFDs to look at all these times of
Yep.
lead time, cycle time, and
Yeah. Okay.
Throughput.
I'm gonna say qualitative data like happiness level.
Happiness level. Okay, great. Yeah, those are interesting as well. Are you're actually capturing those?
We are starting to,
Okay, great.
yes.
I want to talk to you about how you're doing that. That's interesting.
We wrote down psychological safety too, like that's
Yeah.
something again that we're checking out.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. Those are a couple of really, really good metrics. I was assuming actually the more standard ones. Okay, wonderful. Great. So we're going to work with that data, so keep it all with you. You're going to work with that data going forward. So let's start talking about why do we measure in the first place. And of course, this is always happening, right? When you present something, those things run out of batteries. As you notice, I've seen that before. But anyways, I also have a key there. So why do we measure? Why do we measure anyways, right? So it actually turns out that we measure because we want to ask, or we want to answer at least a couple of questions. Now the questions that we ask are, there's a variety of questions that we can ask as well. So the first one is, what happened? What actually just happened? We might have a sense of what's going on, but we can't back that up with data. So that's the first question that we kind of want to answer. What did happen? And we call that descriptive analytics. And it's actually a terminology from a Gartner model that they use for analysis. So that's what happened. It doesn't tell us anything more. We just know, oh, a couple of things happened. Now we've got to look into it. So the second type of question that we want to get answered is, why did this happen? Okay, now we suddenly have our velocity spiking. It goes all the way up. Or somehow our velocity goes down from 53 to 28. Why did this happen? Can we get some more information about this? And then potentially, how can we prevent it going forward? Those are the kind of questions that we want to get answered. And we call that diagnostic analytics, right? And there's a third type of question that we might want to ask as well, and that is, what will happen? Now we look into the future. Now we have all this data that we have from the past. How can we now project what we can do with that in the future, right? How many bugs will we have by the time that we go into production? How long will it take before a feature is finished? Will we be on time? How much budget will we spend to complete everything that is still on the backlog? All of that we call predictive analytics. And then you have empty batteries, and then you have the last one, and that's actually very advanced, and there's not too many that do that yet, and that is, how can we make something happen? Now, with all that data, what do we need to do to predict a certain outcome? Can we somehow figure this out? Can we model a change and see what the simulated outcome is? So how can we actually do that? Yeah?
So question, why would you want to predict a certain outcome? Isn't the goal to...
Which one are you talking about? This one or this one? Are you talking about the predictive analytics, or are you talking about the prescriptive one?
Prescriptive.
Prescriptive.
You want
Well,
things to go well.
Yeah, you might want to change the system. You might want to say, I want to run some experiments, right? And maybe those experiments are fairly expensive. You might want to say, I want to model what that change to the system will do. Based on all the data that I've had, right? What will that particular change to my system do? For instance, we're working in a 2-week sprint. Let's say that you're using Scrum or iterations. You're working in a 2-week sprint. Let's assume that your data gives you insight into how to model that stuff, right? So you're running a whole bunch of machine learning algorithms and so forth, because that's what you require in order to be prescriptive. And you simulate what will happen if we go from 2-week sprint to a 1-week sprint. Now, you wouldn't use it for those kinds of things. You would use it for how can we make something happen related to, for instance, how can we increase our customer base, right? So that's, for those particular things, you want to use prescriptive analytics, but it's expensive to do, and it's difficult. Yeah?
Business intelligence, basically?
Yeah, but advanced business intelligence, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's why we want to measure. We want to answer those 4 categories of questions, right? Obviously, the easier categories are the ones on the left, the things that are talking about the past. The more difficult ones to measure or questions to answer are the ones about the future. So what do we measure now, right? So there's kind of 2 schools there, or 2 major schools at least. You can measure the process, right? Or you can measure the outcome. Obviously, we're going to lean towards the outcome given the title of this particular session. But measuring the process is often, so basically that means, let me give you an example. I was working in an organization, and one of the things that we were measuring is, are we checking all the boxes when it comes to providing the necessary deliverables? Do we have our project plan in order? Do we have our project charter in order? Do we have our test strategy? Do we have all these kinds of things, right? So we were measuring whether or not the process was followed, right? And they're oftentimes confused as lead to be lead indicators. And if you don't know what a lead indicator is an indicator that gives you information about what will happen. If only these things are happening, we predict a certain outcome, usually a positive outcome. And by the way, maybe I should take a break immediately afterwards so that you guys can grab a warm slice of pizza. So they're often confused with lead metrics because, and the reason why I'm saying confused is because they assume that those particular processes are actually leading to a certain outcome, right? And we're going to show later why this might be a problem. And as a result, you actually have the risk of measuring compliance. Are you compliant with this process? Versus, are you achieving what this process is supposed to achieve or is intended to achieve? Right? That's kind of the problem that you have there. Yeah?
So when it comes to lead metrics, right, it's kind of a vague sense because it's saying what type of lead metrics. So there'll be
fair. There's good lead metrics. I'm not discussing that lead metrics are not a good thing to do. Absolutely not. That's a good point. So lead metrics are not necessarily bad, right? Which is why I'm saying that these process metrics are often kind of confused with lead metrics because I don't believe that they are really lead metrics, right? That's what I mean by that. So again, to give you an example of what a lead metric is versus a lag metric, I want to lose weight. A lead metric would be calculating the difference between my calorie intake and my calorie burn. That would give me an insight into will I lose weight or not. All right, really early on, or will I reach my target, losing 5 kilos by I don't know the end of the year? It's gonna be hard. Maybe mid next year. Let's say something like that. A lag metric would be I'm going to stand on the scale half a year from now. That would be a lag metric. I know whether I made it or not. It won't give me any indication whether or not I will make it. Now, the interesting thing with lag metrics and measuring outcomes is, since I did this kind of survey right in the beginning, most of you are working in an agile environment. Well, we deliver early and often. Because we deliver early and often, these things actually get a lead indicator characteristic. Because you can get an awful lot more outcome-based metrics really early on, and you can use them to project what's going to happen in the future. So they almost like turn into lead indicators. Kind of interesting, eh? If you look at it that way. Okay, so we have our next workshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to grab a slice of pizza so that you have a warm slice of pizza instead of a cold one at the end. Because my data tells me that you wouldn't be happy with cold pizza.
Is that a lead indicator? Now, is that causation or just correlation?
I think that cold is causation.
Causation, yeah. Unhappiness with your presentation is a direct causation from cold pizza.
Oh, I don't think there's a correlation with the happiness about the presentation. Oh, yeah.
See? How are things going?
This is actually
You guys keep busy? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Business hopping. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Self-organizing to a queue, so we can go to the lead time to pizza. Yeah, pretty good. There may be some more, like they've said, you're working on this. Well, I am.
This was mine, right? Same thing.
Business intelligence.
Also bring struggling to get through every day. I'm going to make it yours. Now you get nothing you think they know? And you say, what should we be doing differently? What we're focusing on is ceremonies, processes. Culture shift, mindset shift. Why are we doing things? A little bit of question. We have these metrics So I think resistant joining the your center check and they're all good camp. Who's on the pro side? Where's the scrum? Right? Where's the anyway, that's a big question. Anything goes wrong in
okay. So can I continue? Feel free to grab stuff. Okay, what? Yeah, okay, thank you. Feel free to grab stuff. It doesn't bother me. Feel free to walk around if you need to stretch your legs. But I'm going to continue because I just learned that we have a little bit less time than I anticipated. Okay? So don't worry, you don't need to talk right now. So you can do that actually with your mouth full if you don't. Actually, that's not true because it's just a workshop coming up.
That's why he wants to eat, so
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe. Okay, so what I want you to do is go back to those metrics that you have, right? And we're going to make this a little bit shorter because of the time that I just learned. So what I want you to do is look at those metrics and try to figure out what is the question that those metrics answer, right? We talked about metrics needing to provide an answer to a question. What is that question that those metrics that you listed that they answer? The second thing is this an outcome-based or is this a process metric? And the third one is, are they descriptive if you really have a chance and if you really have time to do it? Are those descriptive metrics telling you what happened? Diagnostic metrics telling you why did it happen? Predictive metrics telling you what will happen, or prescriptive metrics telling you how can we make something happen. Okay? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes only for doing that. Right now. Life is for the fast.
Last is the first process. Cycle time. Cycle time.
Lead time.
Current charges that
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a bigger room. Free session always.
we have some target date, right? I mean, we are not conduct the 100% measures, that's why I brought the formal like project management. We have some target date, right? We need release by that date. Measuring outcome.
When are you measuring it? Before or after you hit there?
You have to drive towards that target.
When you measure schedule though, is it when you've done the project or are you measuring it as you go?
Measure it as you go. Making sure that we are on time.
So you're looking at the very good measure.
And so what we need
Because we have said, for us to do January 1st, we have to finish this work by this date, this work by this date. So we're always looking for the year, and then we're assuming.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I'm not going to ask you what all the questions were they answered, but who was measuring mostly process outcomes or process metrics? Like about a third. Who mostly outcome metrics? Fewer ones. Who a mix of the two? Okay, so a whole bunch of people did not have any metrics at all. Okay, that's great. Or are too busy eating. Who had prescriptive metrics? Things that tell you how can we make something happen? Nobody? Who had predictive metrics? Things that tell you what will happen? Okay, one person, a couple people. Who had diagnostic metrics? So why did it happen? Nobody? And who had descriptive metrics? What happened? Okay, so people mostly had descriptive metrics. Interesting. Okay, great. Okay, let me tell you a couple of pitfalls. So when you're calculating metrics, there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. There's pitfalls. The first one is, I always find the most interesting one, which is perverse incentives. What are perverse incentives? Perverse incentives are incentives that drive the people or the teams towards scoring really well at those metrics, but actually achieving the opposite effect. The example that I gave earlier on related to compliance with the process and the documents that needed to be there, needed to be done. I've literally been working in an organization where my department was looking at, are those documents on the SharePoint site, right, for the entire process? Do we have a project plan? Do we have a test strategy? All those kinds of things. You know what they are, right? And I did an analysis of that after a while. Turned out that a lot of those were just the templates. There was not a single letter that had changed in the document. It was just the templates. But all the projects were green because they checked all the boxes, right? So that is what you can get to with a perverse incentive, right? I've had a situation where we were actually, or my management team wanted to measure developers on produced lines of code. So what we got was, they had white space all over the place. They had brackets where there were no brackets necessary. It was insane. They had documentation in their code. Yeah, they were doing really well. Now, a totally opposite metric in Google, I don't know if they still do it, but a couple of years ago, I was familiar with what Google was doing in terms of measuring their people. One metric that they had is, how many lines of code can you remove? Now that's entirely different. Now, hopefully that didn't lead to a whole bunch of things on one line of code, because that has its own problems as well. So that's perverse incentives. The next one is the Hawthorne effect. And the Hawthorne effect is an effect that was first seen, I don't know anymore what the company was, but what they were doing is they wanted to see what the effect was on increasing the intensity of the light on their factory workers. So, okay, so they said to some people, your department, we're going to test you guys, we're going to increase the light intensity and see if that indeed makes you produce more. Yeah, sure thing, that happened. Okay, so they increased it a bit more, sure thing, that happened. They had more productivity. And they started changing a whole bunch of other things, and they had more productivity. And they turned it back to what it was before they started the measurements. and it improved. It kept on improving. And then they said, okay, we figured everything out what we needed to do, and they stopped measuring, and productivity fell back to what it was before. So what this actually means is when your audience knows about the metric, then it will start working towards that metric. I translate this as you get what you measure. Right? If you measure something, be damn sure that your target audience will actually work towards improving that particular metric. Now that's a good thing. You can use this as long as the metrics that you're measuring are things that you want and lead to right behaviors instead of to the wrong ones, which is what those perverse incentives do. And the third one that I want you to know is Goodhart's law, and that is, as soon as you start turning a metric into a target, the metric loses all its value. What you're actually doing at that point is you're changing the system. You're changing the system by introducing a certain target, and the behavior of the people change. The behavior of the whole system actually changes. Right? So don't try to introduce targets. Like for instance, we want our team to go from 30 to 50 in terms of velocity. Okay, forget it, you will get 50. Be damn sure you will get 50. You'll probably get a lot faster than you wanted to, right? But I'm not quite sure if you will get the results that you were hoping for, right? In terms of real productivity. So that's Goodhart's law. These are the things that you need to be aware of in order to design good metrics. And we'll tell you later how to design good metrics. The first thing that we're going to do now is you are going to game your own metrics. Pick one, pick two, the one that most of you use. Try to game it. Try to make sure that you change the behavior. So have a couple of suggestions of changing the behavior of your team to make this metric look really, really good, but getting the exact opposite effect. I gave you an example with the code. The lines of code. Something like that. Try and figure this out. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Shouldn't take too long. Everyone knows how to game metrics. It's in our blood. 2 minutes.
Overestimate 3 stories. Comparing 3 stories.
Refining
That's going to give you
It's an overestimate, closing 3 stories, assign points.
There's a few elements from it. Yeah,
You're taking a parallel path, slightly different.
Get wider on the term definition.
We're actually in the process of this is setting it up, right?
In general, estimate your subtasks and estimate your story.
or just give bigger points to stories.
Yeah, we've got overestimate.
Cycle time, I've noticed sometimes you wait for Wilson to end progress, so you start working on it, and then when you're halfway done, you put it to end progress. It's cycle time. Yeah, so
Put it in there so it kind of starts.
it starts when you click on end progress, and you already worked on it. That's one way to get better. Then you have a short cycle
Anything else?
I was at a conference one time when they were talking about point story. And they mentioned the call center, how they tried to reduce the amount of time spent per call. And they actually had more funding in the audience. Yeah, so I'm going to figure out they started measuring everybody that had to start reducing their calls.
Point the retrospective.
And instead of actually fixing the computers, they said,
Okay, so let me hear some very interesting gaming. So who wants to come up with something? Who is something that they found interesting? Actually,
shorter stories make our velocity higher.
shorter stories make our velocity higher, right? Or even just inflating the story points, right?
That's a 13.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Move to in progress after you've started working on a story to reduce cycle time.
Move to in progress after. I mean, who's ever done that, right? Anything else?
Oh, sorry.
Well, shall we say, making the developer capacity kind of the same level, even though you know that maybe only 30% of the developers are probably at 75, the rest of them are like 10, 15% capacity.
So all at 30% capacity.
No, I'd say all at 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was one here as well?
Yeah, closing the story at the end of a sprint, and then copying a new one for the scope. that you
The story is done. Okay, well then. Yeah. Oh, that happens all the time.
There's
Happens
only
all the
one
time.
done, not done. Just one done.
So, well, the sprint is done, so we close our story, right? We just copied the same thing because it was not really done. Okay, absolutely. So you see, these things are actually happening, right? And this is human nature. There's nothing that you can prevent. There's nothing that you can do to prevent that from happening, but having good outcome-based
The
metrics.
question is, why are you feeling that pressure to do that?
Well, because you're human. It's as simple as that. As soon as you have those targets, as soon as those numbers are actually there,
Yeah.
that's what happens. Those are the biases that we all have. And the system that you need to build is a system in which that pressure is not felt, or you do not encourage them to do the wrong thing. So that's what we're getting towards. Okay? So a lot of these ideas come from this particular book, which is called Escape Velocity. There's a link to it as well at the very end of the presentation, or when you give us the feedback. So I'll give you an alternative approach. And now we're getting into the crux, and I know that we only have kind of 15 minutes, so I'll go a little bit faster. So I use 4 guiding principles. The first one is, I want a minimal impact on the work. People should not do extra work for you to get metrics. That's one. The second thing is, they can be trusted, right? So that means they need to come from an objective source. Preferably, all of that is automated, and that will cover those 2 things, right? The third one is provide insight into a decision. I'm not going to get metrics that don't give me insight into a decision that I need to make, right? Not just measuring for the sake of measuring. I want to do something with them. And the fourth one is I measure outcomes and not compliance, because compliance is not what I want. I want results. Okay, so there's a simple process that actually allows you to build metrics quite well. It's called GQM. And the G stands for, what is your goal? What is it that you're trying to achieve? The Q stands for, what are the questions that we need to get answered in order to know that we're actually achieving that goal? And the M then is the development of your metric, right? That gives you an answer to those questions, then that allow you to understand whether or not you're coming closer to your goals. Now, one of the things might be, and I'll give you an example, velocity, for instance. You're measuring velocity. Okay, so you're seeing what happens. Velocity is how can we deliver more? Right, that's kind of your question. How much do we deliver? Gives us an understanding of are we delivering enough? Are we improving our productivity? That's kind of the theory behind velocity. And I'm saying theory because I'm gonna kind of burst that balloon in a second. But anyway, so our question is how many story points can we deliver in a sprint? And then the metric is just count the velocity per sprint. Now, one of the things that we learn now is, oh, hang on there. Like 3 weeks ago or 3 sprints ago, we had a dip. Now we need to figure out why did we have that dip? We don't necessarily know because we measured velocity. So what we're doing then is we're going back to redefining our goal and trying to figure out where that dip comes from. And this is how we improve our metric system over time. Metrics might just tell us, hey, something went on, but you don't yet know what it was that was what causing that dip. Okay, so where do you start? What is the one thing that everyone wants to measure? What is the one goal for every organization? Productivity, doing more with less. Doing more with less, right?
Return on investment.
So deliver on time is one of those things, doing more with less, right? We want to deliver on time because this is what we commit to with our users and so forth. So what are the questions that we can ask to get more information about that?
How long does it take to deliver?
How long does it take to deliver? I'm going to phrase this somewhere else because you need more. I want to start with the simplest.
What will help us deliver faster?
Well, Yeah, but that's going to be difficult to get through
For
metrics.
the objective, what we want to deliver for the time.
Yeah, so how much work can we actually get done? How much work can we get done, and that will give us insight in whether or not we will deliver on time. And I'm going to rephrase it a tiny bit, and that is, how many features can the team complete? And I'm talking specifically about features, right? So this is not a detail. So the metric would be throughput. And if you don't know what throughput is, Merriam-Webster has a fantastic definition for that. The amount of something that goes through something. I kid you not. That's the Merriam-Webster definition of throughput, right? So go and look it up. The link is right here. You get it when you get that feedback. You will see that's the actual definition of Merriam-Webster. Anyways, so it's the amount of work that goes through a system, right? So how do we measure that? It's actually quite simple. We have a single data point. This is a timeline, right? At some point we say, hey, we're done. This thing is done. At that point, the only thing that you need to do is you kind of just say, we're done at that time. This particular piece of work is done at this particular time. That's all we need to do. I say, wow, what can we learn from that? This is what you can learn from that. One single data point. Let me tell you what this all means. There's a lot of information on there. This is the throughput for an individual week, not a sprint, a week. This is real data, by the way. This is no fake data, right? From a team, actually a fairly large team, because they at some point they delivered more than 100 things in 1 week. 1 week, the next week, the next week, the next week. So what can you see? Well, one of the things that we see is there are high ones and low ones. And oftentimes it's high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low. That's interesting. Why would that be? Okay, we can get to that later on. The next thing that you see is, this is my moving average. Is the moving average calculated over the last 6 weeks? Now you see like, oh, hey, that stays relatively stable. Oh, wow, we have a dip here. Something's going on. Don't know yet what, right? The next thing that you see is, well, this is actually my burn-up. This is your burn-up chart. And on top, based on the moving average, this is your projection. So between now and the end of the year, this team is going to be able to deliver this many more things. This is not velocity. There's no estimation in there. Absolutely no estimation in there. It's just how many things can we complete. It's quite impressive that you can do this with just one single data point, right? So this Excel, we will give that to you as well if you give us your feedback. So all of that stuff is going to be sent to you. Now, we don't stop there. We want a little bit more. Okay, so let's give a little bit more data. We fixed a bug. Okay, now we know it's the feature or it's a bug. Okay, let's see if we do the same thing. We record all that information. You get some more data. Now our things are not just things. Some of them are features, which is the green stuff. Some of them are bugs, which is the red stuff. Right? Now you start seeing as well, oh, hang on, the green stuff. High, low, high, low, high, low, high, low. Does anyone know in the meantime already what happened?
People are getting discouraged from all the bugs, and so they're
They start working on storing the previous sprint. Previously, they finished.
No. This is simple. This happens all the time.
So you're trying to produce more and fast, and you're
No.
having bugs.
Variation of the system.
It's a 2-week sprint.
Oh.
These people have a waterfall process within their sprint, within their 2-week sprint. They're delivering almost everything in the second week, nothing in the first week.
That's what, like,
But it
all
doesn't
our-
show when you don't have the difference, or it doesn't show as much at least, when you don't have the difference between bugs and stories. So that's interesting. And we don't care about how many bugs you can complete. We care that the bug count stays low, so we kind of do care, but that's not our goal. Our goal is, by when can we actually deliver all those features? And then we need to have other metrics to make sure that our bugs stay low. So high, low, high, low, high, low. And what the interesting thing is,
That's a big drop in August.
there's a big drop in, well, I can tell you that, but I won't tell you that.
Okay.
But there is something more. I added another line here as well. And another line is the moving average of stories alone. What do you see there? Pretty damn flat, eh? These people's velocity went up all the time. These people the throughput also went up when you considered bugs and stories at the same time. So my thing for you is here, or my advice, focus on what really matters. If you are, and in fact, if you drill a little bit deeper, you start seeing in May that the stories that they deliver goes down. It doesn't show as well because of the scale of the chart, but it actually starts going down. And at some point, they started dealing with their technical debt that they had, and as a result, the story count went up again. This is based on 2 data points. What type of work are you completing, and when is it complete? That's it, nothing more. Okay, let's go a little bit. Oh yeah, so this is what I just told you. That's the area which you need to look. So you can get this chart. At the end, I will show that stuff as well, so you can get it then if you give that feedback, and it's also on the website, as Nasima said.
I shared already.
You shared already. Okay, so what's next? So what's next is, how long will it take before we get this? Okay, so what do we need to do there? We want to make promises that we can keep. You'll get it by the end of the year. Okay, so how can we ask? How long does it take to complete a feature? And what do we measure? We measure cycle time. Cycle time is by the time that we start working on something until it's done. Done, there's a variety of things that you might look at. I prefer done to be in production. But you might have done to be, it escapes the team, everything is all right, and now it's all up to
But that should be negotiated when you're saying, when are we going to have this feature?
That's a different story. If we are actually talking about specifically giving the functionality to your customers, it should be in production. But there's a variety of ways. It depends on what you're measuring, right? Depends on what you're measuring. So the only additional data point is this one. In the beginning, we started. And then you capture that. We started on, let's say, October 29th. And again, you still keep on measuring the last piece. This cycle time is 9 days. Okay? So what do you get based on that? So let's look. This is a tool that we created that actually shows you basically throughput and cycle time. Let's go to cycle time right away. That actually shows you what information you kind of get from all this stuff. So the cycle time in this particular team, for instance, goes up. This is the same data as what you saw before, but with the real dates on it. So the cycle time in this team goes up. This is the variance that, specifically of stories, this is the variance that they have in their cycle time. So it actually becomes less and less easy for them to tell the customers by when they're going to get something, because the variance is so significant, right? So it's an awful lot more information that you get there. And I'm going to get rid of the spikes and all of this stuff, because I don't need that. And the epics as well. I just want to look at those two. So stories is this, and bugs is this, and you see that the bugs, it becomes more and more difficult as well for the bugs to be developed or to be fixed. So there's so much technical debt that starts to be accumulated. Now the interesting thing here is, now you can start doing analysis. This is analysis that we kind of done on this data that tells us, oh, hang on, there's a significant change here that from here on, thank you, from here on, our system changes entirely. So we can get, we actually have different control limits as well. And if you apply this to your throughput as well, and this is all standard data, if you apply this to your throughput, you kind of see this. So there's so much information. So let me tell you what happened in this particular system. They went from 1 team to 2 teams to 4 teams. That's what happened. And the section of data that you saw in the end is this section, the one in the very end. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here because I got one more slide to actually show you that it's really important. There are standards, more and more important standards. So this is the DORA Institute. The DevOps Research and Assessment Institute, I believe it's called, currently part of Google. And they have identified, based on metrics that they have calculated for a variety of organizations, they have identified that only 2 matter, throughput and stability. And throughput, they use 2 measures, which is deployment frequency, how many times do we deploy into production, and lead time to deployment. I check in my code by when is it in production. Those are the 2 metrics. And then for stability, they have change failure rate, How many times when I push a change into production, does it fail? Does it introduce a bug or whatever that might be? And how long does it take me to recover from that failure? Those metrics are going to give you an indication of whether or not your team is high productive as an IT organization, right? So look into them. The link as well we provide in the end. There's 3 things that I want you to remember. Sorry, I'm rushing in the end. I wasn't aware that I was kind of counting on a little bit more time. Is only measure the things that you're willing to change. That's really important. 2, measure outcomes and just ensure that you produce those outcomes regularly. So reduce your process to something iterative and fast, and you get what you measure. So make sure that you use that to your advantage. There you go. That's it. I'm staying behind. You got your 5 minutes, Shaheen. I'm staying behind. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask him. If you get this feedback, we'll send you the Excel sheet that we just showed you, where you can get, based on 1 data point, all of that information. So it's quite a valuable thing. There you go.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I just wanted to announce something quickly. And first of all, thank you for you guys to be joining us. Thanks to our speaker and thanks for the McKinsey investment providing. Thank you so much. As Gino suggested and said, he is a big supporter of Agile community in Toronto. I know it myself. And the Toronto Agile Community Conference coming up November 5th, Tuesday. If you guys didn't buy a ticket, go there. It's going to be good, I guess. November is our anniversary month, so there are 2 surprises that might coming up to you guys in November month. And so keep look at your emails and notifications. One of them is related to starting Kanban, and the other one is related to lean change management.
I thought cake.
November 29th, we are going to have our next session. Nuno and Vinay is going to talk about cognitive bias.
That fits really well into this as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And the reason that we ended up at 1 to give you guys a chance to have any question from a speaker to network, we have this room for half an hour at least. Thank you all of you.